everyone. Happy to have you back with us for another episode of our podcast.
Shalom Chaverim. We are so excited.
For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Ron.
And I'm Naama.
And we're high school graduates from Israel who were chosen to volunteer in the Jewish community of Cincinnati for a year and bring our point of view of Israel to everywhere we go.
This year is almost over for us, and we're heading to summer camp soon. But the project that we worked on, such as this podcast, will forever be a memory of the amazing experience we've had here.
I agree, and it's amazing to see how many topics we were able to cover in our podcast. From describing our program and why we're here, to cultural differences in life in Israel, and even the Israeli national days and their traditions.
And, of course, I'm sure you're eager to hear what today's topic is, but before that, we have our word of the day to teach you.
Just as a reminder, each episode starts with a Hebrew word of the day that will connect us to our topic later on. And today, our word of the day is dat.
Dat means religion. It's also the root of the word dati, which is used to describe an observant Jew, primarily Orthodox Jews. We touched on that in our second episode, so if you haven't listened to it, now's your time. You can find links to each episode in the description.
We will talk about how that relates to our topic soon. But before that, we would like to introduce this episode's guest, who is also one of our supervisors here.
And no, no one forced us to have him here.
Sure. So, without further ado, welcome, Tzach.
Shalom Chaverim. Thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
We're glad to have you.
So, we already had 3 whole episodes for our listeners to get to know us. But since they don't know you, would you like to introduce yourself, Tzach?
So, as you already said, my name is Tzach, and in August, my family and I moved to Cincinnati for the next 2 or 3 years. We live in Kibbutz Kfar Nasi, which is located in the northern part of Israel. My background is in education. Over the years, I have several education roles. The most significant one, and the recent one, is the director of a youth leadership program in Israel. It's called Pre-Military Academy. In Hebrew, it's called Mechina Kdam Tzva'it. I worked there for 13 years in various roles. In addition, I hold a bachelor and master's degree in education. And now I'm here.
So, Tzach's role in the next 2 to 3 years is called Shaliach in Hebrew. It comes from the word shlichut that we mentioned in our first episode. This is your chance to go and listen to that one too.
Naama, stop advertising our podcast and get to the point.
Anyways, Tzach, could you tell us more about what it means to be a shaliach? What does your job include?
The idea behind Shlichut, Israeli Emissary program, is to strengthen the connection between Israel and the Jewish communities in the diaspora. This is not a simple task because alongside the similarities between those communities, there are also quite a few tension and disagreements. There are different types of emissaries. There are teens emissaries like yourself. There are young adults emissaries in summer camp and in university campuses. And there are also adult communities emissaries like myself who work with the local Jewish Federation. My shlichut is more focused on the education field, both because of my background and because after October 7, there is a growing understanding that we need to rethink about the way the children as well adults in the diaspora learn about Israel.
That's so interesting. Tzach is actually sent to Cincinnati with the same program that brings us to. But we didn't just bring him here to talk about himself.
I'm sure everyone would love to hear me talk about myself.
Speak for yourself.
Anyway, as an educator, Tzach knows a lot about interesting topics and dilemmas in Israeli society, which is why it's perfect for him to be here for today's topic.
So let's jump right in. Today's topic is the relationship between religion and state in Israel. A topic that is always relevant, sometimes controversial, and definitely something every Israeli has an opinion about.
Yep, Israelis do love to voice their opinions. But before we talk about that, let's set the stage for you and give you a look into what Judaism looks like in Israel briefly.
Judaism in Israel is a lot more diverse than many people realize. Even though we often hear about Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox Judaism, the reality is more complex, especially in Israel.
Totally. In Israel, people often define themselves not just by movement, but by how connected they are to religious practice in daily life, which honestly could mean anything from full-on Torah study to just loving matzah bowl soup.
Most Jews in Israel would probably define themselves as secular. That doesn't mean they're disconnected from Judaism. It just means that their connection is cultural. They might have Shabbat dinner and celebrate holidays, but not necessarily go to synagogue or follow religious practices.
That's basically where Naama and I land. And then there's this big group in the middle, called Mesorati, or traditional. They sort of mix and match, like they might keep kosher at home but order shrimp on vacation.
My grandpa would always say that what happens on vacation stays on vacation.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's the religious population, which includes both Orthodox, Dati, and ultra-Orthodox, Haredi. And that's where a lot of the complexity around religion and the state starts to show up.
To help us understand the ultra-Orthodox community better, we asked Tzach to explain who they are, what they believe in, and how they interact with the state.
Well, it's difficult to explain the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel because this movement, this community is made of very small communities that everybody is a little bit different from each other. But if I need to say something in general about this movement, it started in Europe. It started in Europe in the end of the 19th century, and it started because of the modernism in Europe. And this group trying to isolate themselves from the other population in Europe, and they started to live separately in different neighborhoods. They have different education system, they dress differently, and they're trying to be as less involved in the community that's around them. And a lot of those communities disappeared after the Holocaust. And the survival decided that they want to rebuild the Torah world again. So the survivors that come to Israel continue the lifestyle that they have in Europe, only in Israel. One of the problems today that in the early years of Israel, this community was very small, and today it's a big porch of the general society in Israel.
Thanks, Tzach. That really helps give some context to how the ultra-Orthodox community fits into Israeli society.
And now we can start talking about the actual conflict because, yeah, it's not just about how people practice religion. It's also about how religion connects to the laws of the country.
It's important to say that this whole debate didn't just start recently. The conflict between religion and state has actually been going on even before Israel became a country. It all goes back to the 1940s.
At that time, a committee called UNESCO, or United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, was in charge of deciding what to do with the land of Israel. This committee came to Israel to interview different parts of the population and to hear about what they thought was the solution to the conflicts inside the state.
And, of course, David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, needed all the help he could get. He approached the ultra-Orthodox community and asked them to say in these interviews that they support a Jewish country. In return, he offered up something called the status quo agreement.
It wasn't an official law. It was more like, let's wait till we have a real country and then we can start fighting eternally. Basically, the government agreed to keep some religious policies in place just to keep the peace.
Tzach, can you tell us a little bit more about the status quo agreement?
As you said, Ben-Gurion needed support of the ultra-Orthodox parties, and he promised them that they can live in autonomy. This has several implications. The most significant one, maybe it's a different education system, that they can choose their own curriculum. And the other one, he said that if you study Torah, you don't need to go to the army. Some of the people say Ben-Gurion did it for a political reason, and some of them claim that maybe Ben-Gurion believed that the ultra-Orthodox lifestyle is going to disappear, that everybody in the future is going to be secular, everybody's going to be Zionist, and he said to himself, oh, if it's a small community, we can let them keep the Torah word and they don't need to serve in the army. But the reality in Israel changed, and today the community, the ultra-Orthodox community, is almost 12% of the society. And there is a lot of people that say maybe we need to challenge the status quo. And for many reasons, in the last maybe few decades, people didn't touch it. Maybe from political reason, maybe not. But in the reality today, a lot of people say we need to think again about the status quo and our relationship with the ultra-Orthodox community.
Okay, so this agreement was made.
Yay!
We got a state.
Double yay.
But looking at Israel today, I can understand why the ultra-Orthodox community is unhappy.
Yeah. They're unhappy because a lot of the agreement didn't actually come into fruition the way they hoped.
Exactly. From their point of view, the idea was to keep the Jewish identity of the state strong, not just culturally, but religiously. But over time, Israel became more modern, more diverse, and honestly, a lot more secular.
It feels for them like the promise of a religious state, a state that protects halakha, or Jewish law, is slipping away. And that creates real frustration.
But they're not the only ones frustrated. It's kind of this strange situation where both sides, religious and secular, feel like they're the ones losing.
Right. I can also totally understand why secular Israelis are frustrated too. The country was meant to be both Jewish and democratic, but sometimes those two ideas really clash.
While we have Tzach here, I think it would be a good idea for us to dive deeper into some of the religious questions that cause conflict and dilemma in Israel.
Okay, so we have talked about the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel, but the relationship between religious and state is not limited only to the ultra-Orthodox community. This tension exists with other sectors of Israeli society as well. And I believe that the root to this question, it's maybe in the fundamental question, what is meant to have a Jewish state? Some people say we just need a majority of Jews that live in Israel and it's enough for us. But other people say it's also need to be a Jewish identity. And I think this is when it starts to be interesting to live in Israel. And so in Israel, we have a lot of groups, a lot of maybe Jewish sectors, and everybody has different vision about what it's meant to have to be a Jew and what is meant to live in a Jewish state. And this different vision, maybe what's make Israel, in one hand, very beautiful and interesting place to live. And in the other hand, it's very difficult to try to figure out how we can live our life with everybody's maybe have a different vision to the Jewish state. So today we have maybe a few questions that Israel society debates because the tension between religious and state in Israel. I think the first one is who is a Jew and how you can become a citizen in Israel. Today, Israel only recognizes the Orthodox conversion, and this is a lot of question that the Reform movement asks if they can be part of Israel if we don't recognize their process of converting. The other one is Shabbat. Shabbat is like the holy day in the week, and there is a question if the state need to fund activities that violate Shabbat. I think the biggest issue is public transportation in Shabbat. And maybe the last one is what count Jewish marriage and how should divorce be handled. So this is maybe some of the issues that we struggle with, but this is a few examples, the tension that's surrounding the relationship between religious and the state of Israel.
Let's start with talking about one of the major issues in this conflict, the monopoly of Orthodox religious authorities over certain Jewish ceremonies. These ceremonies relate to citizens' personal status, such as Jewish marriages, divorces, conversion to Judaism, and even burial.
These laws determine that in order for Jewish people in Israel to participate in these personal ceremonies, they must adhere to strict Orthodox rules. Simply put, this means that many Israelis are deprived of the right to freedom of choice.
Let's dive deeper into those different ceremonies and how they look under Orthodox law. For example, lack of civil marriage in Israel means that couples who don't fit into Orthodox standards simply can't legally get married in Israel.
Same-sex and interfaith couples have to go to extreme lengths to get married, including traveling to other countries, getting married on Zoom, and more, just to express their love for each other.
This is the same country with the gayest city in the world, by the way.
Divorce under Orthodox law can also limit people's freedom of choice. In Judaism, it is believed that only the husband may request a divorce document, or a get, from the wife, and not vice versa. This means that if the wife wants to get a divorce for any reason that isn't justified by Judaism, and if her husband won't grant her the get, she remains married and therefore cannot get remarried under Jewish law.
The restrictions don't end with marriages and divorce. Burial is also tightly controlled by Orthodox authorities in Israel.
That's right. In most cases, burial in Jewish cemeteries has to follow Orthodox customs. That means ceremonies must be conducted a certain way, and there is usually no flexibility for personal or alternative religious expressions.
And even more painful, some people who see themselves as fully Jewish aren't allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery at all, just because the Orthodox rabbinate doesn't recognize them as Jewish.
That includes people who were converted through Reform or conservative movements, or those who have only one Jewish parent. Even if they've lived their whole lives as Jews, the religious system in Israel might still label them as non-Jews at the moment of burial.
It really brings up that same core question again. Should the state define how people express their Jewish identity, even in their final moments?
That is an interesting topic. Tzach, would you like to elaborate on this?
First of all, you described well the difficulties that the Orthodox monopoly in Israel create for many population. And I think I have an answer that you don't like to hear. In my opinion, the reason that this is the reality in Israel, it's because the secular population in Israel, maybe they just don't care. They have a lack of concern about the Jewish identity. And a lot of them believe that if it's like the Judaism belongs to the religious people. So they don't really put any effort about thinking about the way that they want their identity, their Jewish identity to be part of their life. Just for example, when I got married, I didn't know that there is a few alternative or a few ceremonies that I can do it because I know only the Orthodox way. And I think this is the story of a lot of secular people that they don't know that you have another alternative other the Orthodox monopoly. So a lot of them didn't really think how I want to live my life, how is my Jewish identity need to look like. And I don't know, they just stick with what we already exist. I think this is maybe the biggest difference the Jewish that live in Israel feel rather than Jewish that live in the diaspora. In the diaspora, you need to choose to be a Jew. In Israel, it's obvious. So here you have a lot of alternatives, and maybe the Jewish love are much more richer than in Israel. And I think this is one of the reasons the monopoly of the Orthodox communities exist in Israel. And I think that if we want to fix it, the secular population in Israel need to be part of the Jewish discourse in Israel. They need to say, this is our life, we are Jewish, and we believe that our Jewish identity need to reflect our values. And this is why we insist that the marriage ceremony need to be different, it need to be recognized by the country, and it doesn't matter if you are an Orthodox, if you are secular, if you are a part of the LGBTQ community, the Jewish identity belongs to all of us.
This is really interesting, and we could definitely talk about this for hours. But for now, we're going to move on with another law that causes tension. The law regarding public transportation on Shabbat.
That is also a very big dilemma. You're really smart today bringing up all these dilemmas, Naama.
I'm always smart.
Oh my God, take the compliment.
You are right to mention this law. Since Israel's founding, as part of the status quo agreement that was discussed before, most public transportation, such as buses and trains, don't run from Friday sundown to Saturday night. This is done in order to respect the Shabbat as a Jewish holiday.
And it makes sense why it would be important to Orthodox people. Jewish law prohibits work on Shabbat, and in order to preserve the Jewish character of the state, some believe it's necessary to keep this law in place.
I agree, but on the other hand, it can also be crucial to have public transportation on weekends. Some people don't have cars, and buses and trains are their primary way of getting around. Whether it is to go to work if it operates on Saturdays, or even just hang out with friends, meet family, and live life like any regular day.
You know that in some major cities, there actually do have some public transportation on Shabbat.
Can you explain more about how that works with the current law?
So the issue of public transportation is complex, and it sparked a lot of debates inside Israel. And I think in the end, it's the same question. What does it mean to live in a Jewish state? And I will explain. Israel was found and still function on a very strong socialist foundation, which means that, for example, the public transportation is funded and subsidized by the government. And for many years, the government say, as part of the status quo that we talked before, we don't going to subsidize an activity that violates Shabbat, because Shabbat is the holy day, and this is part of the status quo. And this was the reality in Israel. And in Israel, till a few years ago, there's only one bus company. It was owned by the government. As part of the status quo, they didn't operate on Shabbat. Today, the reality is a little bit different because we have also private companies that can, if they want, operate on Shabbat. But because it's expensive service, the people can't afford it. So some of the biggest cities have a service that the municipality authority subsidize, and they subsidize part of the public transportation. The problem is that you can use those buses only inside the city. But if you want to travel outside of the city, you still doesn't have a solution in Israel for this.
Wow, I honestly just think of those drivers that have to work on Shabbat instead of being with their families on their one day off.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're religious or not, Shabbat is a significant day for all Jews. It's a day of rest and being with your loved ones.
And that's another really important part of this dilemma.
Okay, the last area of conflict that we want to discuss is one that has recently been getting a lot of media attention and has been a hot topic: the lack of enlistment of Haredim, or ultra-Orthodox Jews, into the Israel Defense Forces.
It's important to note that this dilemma doesn't completely fit in with the others, since it's not only about the relationship between religion and state. It goes deeper. It's tied to a core belief in the ultra-Orthodox world that studying Torah isn't just a religious practice, but the path to spiritual redemption for the entire Jewish people.
We wanted to bring this dilemma up because it's interesting and very talked about currently in Israel.
This issue goes way back. When the state was first founded, a small number of yeshiva students were allowed to skip military service so they could study Torah full-time. It was meant to be temporary, just a few hundred guys.
But today, that number has grown into tens of thousands. And for a lot of Israelis, it feels unfair, especially since military service is mandatory for almost everyone else.
And at the same time, the Haredi community sees Torah study as their service to the Jewish people. It's not just school, it's their life purpose, and something they see as protecting the nation spiritually.
Tzach, can you help us understand this conflict a little better? Can you elaborate on this?
So this is truly the complex issue that Israel today is facing with. I think is the first one, of course, is the war, but I think the second one is the ultra-Orthodox community and the serving in the army. As I mentioned earlier, the ultra-Orthodox community try to isolate themselves from the other society. And if you're joining the army, you're going, I guess, that you're going to meet other people. You're going to meet other communities, other beliefs. There is women that serve in the army, and serving in the army really threat the Jewish identity of the ultra-Orthodox community. So ultra-Orthodox community, like the rabbi say, we don't care. We can serve in the army, but you need the army to fit our beliefs, and the army need to change if you really want to bring the ultra-Orthodox to serve in the army. And in many years, like the rule in Israel that you have to serve, but in many years the army, the IDF, didn't really want them, because it's kind of a headache. If you are a 19 years old ultra-Orthodox person, apparently you already married, maybe you have like a young kid, and you need a lot of flexibility. And the army say for himself, oh, this is a headache, so we don't really need them. We can get along with a small army, but this reality is changing. And after October 7, we understand the reality in Israel is changing, and now we need a bigger army, and we need more soldiers. And there is a limitation about the days that other soldiers can do reserve day, and we need more soldiers. And this is why today the army is willing to do a lot of changing, in effort to bring the Jewish community, the ultra-Orthodox community, to serve in the army. And there is a lot of fear inside the ultra-Orthodox community, because they say, if we're going to serve in the army, we're going to lose our kids, we're going to lose our Jewish identity. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle between the community that want to keep their unique lifestyle and the needs of the government and the state of Israel.
You know, it really feels like one of those situations where no one's totally happy. Secular Israelis want equality and fairness, while Haredim feel like serving in the military would mean giving up their entire way of life.
After the war started, everything became even more intense. Families were being torn apart as tens of thousands were called up for reserve duty. People lost their income, businesses had to close, and kids didn't see their parents for months.
As you can imagine, and rightfully so, the effects of thousands of ultra-Orthodox not enlisting was felt more strongly than ever. The army was stretched thin, people were exhausted, and the fact that an entire sector of the population wasn't enlisting felt impossible to ignore.
You could really feel it across the country. The frustration grew. People said, how is it fair that my family is sacrificing everything while others don't even show up? And this time, people weren't just upset. They were demanding action.
There were protests, petitions, and pressure on the government. The whole issue of army exemptions for Haredim became one of the most urgent public debates in Israel. Again.
Tzach, can you tell us where things stand now? Is anything actually changing, or is it still stuck in the political back and forth?
Okay, so for many years, the exemption of ultra-Orthodox men from military service was illegal. You have to serve in the army if you're Israeli citizen. And during the years, the Supreme Court gave the governments, several governments, an option to create a framework that maybe they can choose amount of people that don't need to serve in the army, and the other one have to serve in the army like every other Israeli 18 years old. And it was a lot of struggling, and a lot of government, actually coalition, fell because of this process. And in the last, I think, year and a half, before October 7, the Supreme Court say, okay, there is no time anymore, and you have to serve in the army. So if you don't get a new framework till, actually it's going to be next month, so it's going to be sanctions of people that don't going to serve in the army. Now, because it's difficult to find each individual that don't going to serve in the army, so the Supreme Court say, if you are an organization, institution that have students that don't going to serve in the army, we're going to stop the funding for this institution. And this is a shock for the ultra-Orthodox community, because one of the core value of this community is education. And their education system is well funded by the government. And if the government going to stop this funding, they're going to have a hard time to continue their lifestyle. So today, this is the reality. In the coalition, there is ultra-Orthodox parties that put a lot of pressure on the government to release the ultra-Orthodox youth from serving in the army. In the other hand, you have other parties that they say, we can't release you from the army service during a war. We need you, we need more soldiers. And we don't know where it's going. There is a tension, and this time frame that the Supreme Court gave to the government is going to end, I think, in a month or two. And then if they didn't decide of a new framework to bring the ultra-Orthodox to the army, the Israel government, by the law, need to stop the funding of education institution of the ultra-Orthodox community. So this is a big issue in the politics today in Israel, and we need to wait and see what's going to happen.
This really brings us full circle. The question of religion and state isn't just about ideology. It's about how we live together, how we share responsibility, and how we define equality.
Israel isn't perfect by a long shot, but we love it nonetheless. And we continue to always hope for a future of unity and progressive change for the better.
We believe these conversations are our first step toward something better, toward understanding, compromise, and hopefully real solutions.
Tzach, thank you so much for being here and talking with us.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me.
And don't think we forgot this episode's Song of the Day.
Today, we're ending with Shevet Achim Ve'achayot, a tribe of brothers and sisters. This song was written in 2019 by Doron Medali and Idan Reichel. It was released just before Israel's Independence Day that year and features more than 30 Israeli artists. Religious, secular, Jewish, Arab, Mizrahi, Ashkenazi, you name it.
The idea behind it was to send a message of unity in a time when the country felt really divided. Sounds familiar, right?
Exactly. Even when we disagree, even when things feel tense, we're still a part of the same story. And this song reminds us of that.
Enjoy!
70 שנה במכונית, אני נוסע ומביט על מה היה ומה נהיה, ואיך נפשי עוד הומייה בהמצדה של הזריחות, ירושלים בסליחות, מחוף כנרת ואכסים, מהמסיבות של תל אביב. אבי חלם והתפלל לחיות בארץ ישראל. היום ילדי אותי שואל מה הסיפור של ישראל. כאן זה בית, כאן זה לב, ואותך אני לא עוזב. אבותינו שורשים ואנחנו הפרחים המנגינות, שבט אחים ואחיות, אותה שכונה, אותו רחוב, תריס ארבנים של יעקב, אוספים ביחד נדודים בתוך תרמיל געגועים. אדם נוף מולדתו, חורת קווים בכף ידו, בין התפילות לנדרים, ריחות פרדס של הדרים, ובעיניה של אמי תמיד אמצא את מקומי, על הגיטרה מתנגן ניגון עתיק שמחבר. כאן זה בית, כאן זה לב, ואותך אני לא עוזב. אבותינו שורשים ואנחנו הפרחים במנגינות, שבט אחים ואחיות. מבראשית הכל תפור, טלאים טלאים של הסיפור, ושתי מילים להתחבר בחוץ האב של משורר. אני מכאן אני שייך, וכל חבר שלי כמו אתה פועמת בלבבי, אני מזרח מערבי. כאן זה לב, ואותך אני לא עוזב. אבותינו שורשים ואנחנו הפרחים המנגינות, שבט אחים ואחיות. כאן זה בית,
כאן זה בית, כאן זה לב, ואותך אני לא עוזב. אבותינו השורשים, ואנחנו הפרחים, המנגינות, שבט אחים ואחיות.